What are you doing, beloved?
Attention, attention, my black brothers. What I want y'all to do right now is take out the do-rag, the silky, tie it down. I want to see the waves glistening. If you got nappy hair, pick it. Don't let nobody discourage you.
Ariel.
Black boys, black boys.
I'm saying, now it might be too late. Other people might have beat you to the punch and they go listen to this.
You
Right. Listen. But you got to be, I mean, in some way, shape, or form, they communicate with Crystal and Kid Fury.
They do.
Don't block your blessings.
Oh, you're right. I don't be thinking high enough, you know.
Do y'all follow her PR agent, Nicole?
No, I follow her.
Yvette? I think is it Yvette?
It's Yvette.
It's Yvette. Y'all should be following Miss Yvette.
I think her Instagram that she had, like not an Instagram, but like I think a Snapchat or like a fake account that she has. Beyonce, I don't know if it was real, but somebody was like, "This is her like her little spam."
If somebody showed you that it ain't real,
right?
Beyonce made a whole ass album with global music videos that ain't now person seen a single screenshot of. It ain't real.
Yeah, I was like,
Snapchat. She said, "I'm not sharing this with you niggas."
Ooh, this is going to be a great episode. We are excited to have you with us today. We felt like, why not have somebody that has been in the conversations a lot, and also who we feel like we can just shoot and talk about things with, specifically right into queer Black men in the space and climate that we are in today. So we are really excited to have you in the space.
And is that the term that both of you use to identify queer?
I'm gay, but...
Yeah, I'm gender nonconforming, and gay man. So, I mean, I literally do whatever, I don't typically, I'm not picky about the terms used, just as long as people recognize that I'm both feminine and masculine. I think it's because I'm not entirely sure which one speaks to me yet, right? Like I've referred to myself as gender fluid, but I think it's about trying to understand the difference between like gender fluid and gender nonconforming, because I allow people to call me man because it doesn't bother me. But I also like when people call me like she or a girl or whatever. I like perfectly love that. But I know a lot of people in the gay community do and are perfectly cisgender. So I think it's just a matter of like which one speaks to the spirit more. And I still don't know.
That's fair. Nor do you have to know, right? And it could also change depending on the moment or your mood.
I think right. I think a lot of people can like realize that like whatever you feel, like however you want to feel, that's what you can express. You shouldn't be feeling like you're confined into a box that somebody else puts you in. If one day you want to feel queer, if you want to feel gender nonconforming, you can do that as long as you feel comfortable and safe. I think that is perfectly fine. But some people are like, and I'm like, girl, worry about yourself. Don't worry about me.
Yeah, that, and I was asking the question because in the same way that people who have access to white privilege have forced us to learn how to bend our tongues to pronounce their names, I think it's important for us when we do settle into our identities and the fullness of them, that we require people to honor them as such, right? And I think often I spend a lot of time thinking about Black trans women, especially today after what has happened most recently. The way in which people use the lack of acknowledgement for people's names and pronouns and identities as a form of violence. And so I'm often hypersensitive to when folks are not declarative and just often want to know why.
I think that's fair because I've interrogated my relationship to it as well, like trying to make sure I wasn't saying it for the sake of like people have gotten comfortable knowing me as this person. And I don't think it's in my nature to do that. I mean, a little bit because I've been conditioned, but I'm a rebel. So I like to push the envelope when I can. I think it really is just about, I need to sit with it a little while longer just to figure out what I do want to be referred to as. But I have started communicating with people about the pronouns that they use with me. And I had to try to explain it, right? Like when women say girl, and then they're like, oh, I'm sorry, boy, that actually causes me a lot more discomfort, that correction. It does a lot more, it is more affirming for them to use it and let it go because it makes me feel like, affirmed in my gender expression than when they correct themselves. And that sort of feels like a rejection of that version of me. So I have
Interesting.
Yeah.
Ooh, but can you also hold space for, I received that. How can you shift to the space of acknowledging that in that moment, the correction has nothing to do with you and it's much more visceral response to them and the record of the things that they've been told to say and use when having a conversation with somebody that presents like you do?
Yeah, so I think that's why when I do it, I frame it and like I understand why you're doing it, but for your time with me, and hopefully I hope that leaves space for them to start challenging how they view other people's gender, like, and not as a solid thing, that they start unlearning that. So hey, when you're with me, if you do that, understand that that energy is synced up, for me at least, and you said it because you felt comfortable, and that made me feel comfortable, and being acknowledged as a person who can receive that that pronoun makes me feel a lot more comfortable than you just saying no, like, never mind. So
Yeah,
it's
no,
like,
I
I say
love that. I just don't want
yeah,
you to make it to internalize it and think that it's about you
nah.
in that moment. And the last thing, have you read George Johnson's book, his most recent book?
Reading it. We both have it, actually.
Okay.
We both,
I want to have this conversation again when you finish it. He and I spoke about it last night, and it's it's either mine or MBJC's MBJC on the Moves account. But there's a point where I ask him about the term that he uses, in part because of this journey through both development and language. So I'd be curious to see if and how parts of his journey speak to you.
yeah, I think that'd be dope. I know I was someone that battled with saying I just identify as gay, but in certain spaces I always felt it was appropriate to just say queer for some reason. I don't know why, but
When you say spaces, you mean Black spaces?
yeah, black spaces. I don't.
That's why.
Yeah, I think that was. I don't want you. I don't, because it used to always get tricky and funny. Like, oh,
Because gay is white gay. Gay is sissy. It's punk. It's all of the things that we are taught as Black boys that we're not supposed to be, right? So the safe space and the language that we've inherited is in queer, because queer is anything that is not hegemonic, in a position of power, white, able-bodied, cis, Protestant, landowning, all of those things. So I mean, it makes perfect sense to me that you would use queer
yeah.
in that regard.
I never even realized that, because I've never like just be like I'm gay. I used to be like, I mean, to my friends, like, yeah, I'm gay. But like other people, I just say queer. It's like I don't. That's a subconsciously thing that I'm trying to stop doing, but I've done that so much.
I mean, yeah, listen, give yourselves grace, right? This all, it matters to me as somebody who studied language and loves language. I use same gender loving. I know that as much as I use it and insist that other people use it with me, that in communicating with their friends, they're more likely to say that gay boy than same gender loving. But it is my way of, in the same way that I capitalize the B when I write Black, that I refuse to capitalize W when I write white, that we sort of add to the resistance that is just being.
Yeah, come on. Yeah, I think that's why we started the show. We wanted to help like Black men feel comfortable in those spaces, just because we've also been always told that certain things we have to do in a certain way. So even though we're trying to uncondition ourselves from those things that we've been ingrained in ourselves, and I think that's why it's so great that we're having this conversation even right now in the beginning of the show before we even got into it.
I forgot we were recording and I done took over. Listen, let me sit back and let y'all go ahead.
That's the ambiance we want. We want people to feel comfortable. We want people to feel having two casual conversations with some friends of theirs, but also gaining resources and insight from us as well. Because I think we have that in our bag and our tools. But just to give people just a little bit of what I know or background about you is you are the executive director of the National Black Justice Coalition in DC. The mission is to end racism, homophobia, LGBTQ bias, and stigma. And I also wanted to give you the space to speak about anything that you like wanted people to know about you as well.
That's it. The organization exists to remind folks that as long as there have been Black people, there have been Black, before the terms existed, queer people, LGBTQIAP plus / same gender loving at this point. And to remind folks that it is disingenuous at a minimum to say that you care about Black people, liberation, health, wellness, that you love Black people, if when you say that statement, you don't account for all of us and the beautiful diversity that has always existed in our community. By way of history, we are the third type of organization to exist in this way in our country. We're the longest serving at this point civil rights organization.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm working through some of the history now. I was having conversations with Keith Boykin and Phil Wilson. Keith Boykin and Phil both were instrumental in founding both NBJC and the organization that preceded this one, the National Council for Black, Lesbian, and Gays, if I'm correct. 93, 83. We'll publish it soon, but all of this to say that I've inherited the investments that have been made by political, social activists, experts, and race warriors who acknowledge that we've always existed and always take up space, even when people don't write about it, or even when we haven't had access to places like this, right, to be able to create and tell our own stories. And so much of what I try and do, having the opportunity to quarterback the team in this moment, is leverage my the privilege that I have, that I've inherited and that I've acquired, to be incredibly disruptive.
I can't wait to get into that too, because I have a lot to ask you about regarding that. I've noticed that about you, and it actually opened up. I think I was a little nervous about what questions I wanted to ask because I feel especially radical in this moment. And I've been watching a couple of your interviews, and I was like, oh, wait a minute, this I might be able to ask what the hell I want to ask.
You should always ask what the hell you want to ask. Manny Marable, a professor at Columbia University, got arrested, so who's brilliant, has taught so many of us. Amanda Seals is one of his students as well. Always said that two things, that you should speak full truth to power, especially when it shakes your soul. And both he and Freeman Hrabowski, who's the president of UMBC, who is brilliant, lucky to count him as a mentor, always says that you should ask tough questions. And I tell students all the time, I used to tell my kindergartners all the time, like, it is your job to ask difficult questions. I ask my niece now, I don't want to know if you had a good day. Did you ask tough questions? Did you hold people accountable?
Right.
Did you speak truth to power in the ways that can often get Black girls kicked out of class, or get Black boys called sassy, to think about conversation with George. And so much of my work is really just about equity. I care about Black people. Everything that I have done over the course of my adult life and professional career has been anchored in supporting Black people. I taught elementary school and founded ways to be disruptive there because there was not a single Black boy out of 56 kids in a kindergarten class on 110th Street and Broadway, which is less than 15 blocks away from the center of Harlem. I spent nearly a decade on Capitol Hill crafting policy that still exists right now, affecting the lives of so many people across this country, on the Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. I did that for 8 years as the only Black man in that space, often the only person who had a meaningful relationship to the communities that the bills were designed to affect or touch in some way. And I, before taking this role, led an initiative for still my president, Barack Hussein Obama, his fabulous wife, Michelle Yvonne Robinson Obama, Sasha Malia, Grandma Robinson, Sonny Bo, the dogs, everybody focused on educational excellence for African Americans, which for me was significant because most of my work has been tethered in some way to young people, to students, to children, right? Like I'd always volunteered to help kids like study or prepare for their SATs. I worked at like summer camps. I remember I almost got fired because I was supposed to report to operate some ropes course, and I had a camper who was like breaking through about why he didn't want to perform in the skit. And I cared more about that than the ropes course at the time. And as a Black boy from Inglewood, California, who graduated from Columbia University, teaching, being an educator was not and still is not something that is celebrated.
Yeah.
And so I've been really fortunate, and I'm always aware of the fact that often in these kinds of conversations, people are most excited about the Obama work or what it meant to be on Capitol Hill. And to be clear, that shit was nice, right? Like I am aware of the fact that my family and ancestors that I don't know, but have around me, sacrifice so that I can enjoy those things and add value in those positions. But my connection to and ability to make space for and hold space for and shift shit for our babies is the thing that is the through thread in all that I've done heretofore.
That's one of the things I think that excites me the most about this conversation. I've seen you be a constant educator in like all these conversations that you're having, just very thorough. And not like leaving, you never short circuit the conversation. And that's something I think is super helpful, right? Like giving the people the information that they don't have access to. And even if the conversation gets derailed, which I've seen it almost happen, you have a way of like really bringing it right back in and informing people of like the real life experiences of Black LGBTQ plus people. So I really, when I tell you I'm so excited for you to be here, I really do mean that.
The feeling is mutual.
I was nervous actually to reach out, which I was like, funny thing. It took me, I had to go to therapy to actually process. I was like, I want to reach out to this guy. I want to like really have him on, but I have this imposter syndrome mentality about like, do I have the capabilities of like, we're going to get into this as well into the show, but like, do I have the capabilities of having this organic conversation or have this very insightful intellectual conversation? And I was like, fuck it, you can. Like, what stopped you? You've done this. We've done this, throughout the whole show. So it just was like something I was like, oh, but I was like, you know what? The only thing that can happen is like I'm busy or I'm booked. So I was
yes, and I think all of that is interesting. Considering that this is helpful too, right? And this like I reached out to y'all and said how much I enjoyed and appreciated the work and the acknowledgement. But
you be booked and busy,
to work through that.
I know.
I am, and as my friends and family also remind me that like, and you still make time for the shit that you think is important, right?
Yeah,
so, so all of that's true, right? Like, I don't sleep generally. I haven't really slept since definitely June 1st, in part because everything that's going on in the world, and still chose to honor this commitment.
Yeah. Disclaimer too, I'm gonna just put this out. When we didn't have a studio, so I was like, how do we put forth this? Which was an interesting thing. I never processed Zoom until the pandemic. I was like, how are we gonna do this? What does this look like? But
cultural shift, honey.
Interesting. There's that too, and I also this is interesting. So I am a student of, fan of, and am thankful to have a relationship with Magic Johnson. Mm-hmm. He early on in his development of his enterprise was intentional in philanthropy and started a scholarship program that I was fortunate to be a member of, and then served on the advisory committee for a number of years. And I'll never forget when I went to my first year at Columbia, I ended up talking to him on a call about some idea I had at the time. Maybe it was a consulting business, in part because a number of my classmates already had companies. And I asked him about how he made decisions. And I remember that I said to him, right, like at this point in your life and your career, people are like tripping over themselves to present you with things. You don't even have to, at this point, like reach out really. So like, what is it? What's the secret sauce? And he said to me, the problem with you smart people is you can always think your way out of stuff. You can read another book, you can consult another person, you can write another think piece. At some point you just have to do. And I find that, especially now that those things are interesting, because I always go back to touch points, right? Like Crystal and Kid Fury, I talk about them often, in part because I consume them, the content, not them, to be clear. And no one knows what their operation has looked like before their most recent TV deal, right? And so it might be fodder for another conversation, but I have questions about like, what did you all imagine needed to be that otherwise wasn't, as you were already building, because people are already connecting with and consuming your content too. So like, where did the desire to create additional barriers and roadblocks come from, given that as Black queer men, they already exist in abundance?
We've talked a lot about the pressure involved in and sort of like the expectation of future success that gets in the way of doing the thing, right? Like, so I think And I can only speak from my perspective. I think any push to want to get into like a studio or have studio equipment came from this feeling that like we weren't moving forward, we weren't progressing, and then sort of exposing any of that to our listeners, maybe taking away our credibility. Who knows?
Based on whose standards and
Right.
what dictation.
Right.
It was definitely what Devin was saying was the essential. Like I was in this space and I was like, I don't know if we have the function or capability to have people on. You know, we were shooting in my closet, to be honest. We were shooting in my closet and I was
Good
like,
acoustics.
Yes.
you know,
For folks that don't know, I think we talking about something else.
it was like we shooting in my closet and we were like really in this space of like how to create like this space to bring other people in because it was my personal space. You know, it was like it was my room, and I was like, I don't want to have somebody in here because it's the feng shui and all that. And then it's also my closet. So I was like, we were trying to figure out how to progress ourselves, but I was like, shit, like we gonna do this.
I get all of that, and hear my heart when I say this: the show is the two of you.
Yep. Yeah.
The space, the technology, the whatever can and will change, right? As things develop and we're not on global timeout. But if you remember that, like the show, the content is y'all, then all the other shit is window dressing, literally.
And I think, that's something we were like, this is something that we need to stop being a barrier. We can get whenever people are listening to us, they don't care about what room we got, if we got video, if we got, if we are here still.
Yes, your core. And you got to honor that now, because when you have the breakthrough moment, the next one, it's going to be a whole lot of people that ain't going to really be down with you.
Yeah.
And if you get caught up in the whatever happened in order for them to tune in and miss that there's a whole lot of people who will ride for y'all in the way that the hive rides for B, then there might not be a thing for you to protect anyway.
I love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Like, no, I say that and right, the real for me is that in the last, what day is it?
We don't know no more.
In the last 12 days, I a couple thousand more followers, right? Like more donations, more partnerships, more people who are, and I'm clear, right? Like that shit don't have a whole lot to do with me. It has to do with this moment. And what I have to remember is that there is a community of people who have a smaller portion of it always held me down, right? My inner circle, my village, my tribe, the folks I text with and consult and can be completely vulnerable in front of. And there are people that have seen me show up and connected with me and supported the work along the way. That's who I need to be accountable to.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like the folks that are now showing up and are now vying for attention or doing the things that happen based on the kind of relationships that we can develop with the benefit of technology. And I'm hyper aware of the fact that there are so many people who get caught up in the trappings associated with the moment that you forget that you otherwise should be anchored by a movement.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
That wasn't really me. I feel like that was always, ancestors around.
Divine wisdom is what I like to call it.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So first I want to ask you, we ask our guests this question. Now you've already talked about this, but I just want to know, what does Black Boy Joy mean to you?
What does Black Boy Joy mean to me? It's the ability to just be ... ellipses, right? It is freedom from the constraints imposed by socially constructed stereotypes and expectations around ways of being. It feels like a release from suffocation in ways that allow you to feel comfortable in parts of your body that you have been told that are unworthy of love. It tastes like my godmother's German chocolate cake and all of the things that make me miss being a child who was sheltered from the righteous rage that any conscious Black person should have about all of what we're forced to endure. It looks like moonlight and the ability to find freedom in community and to love Black people through trauma and a whole lot of pain, and to have relationships that make your whole soul smile. And for me, it's the North Star, right? I live for the day when little Black boys don't have to worry about the trappings of blue or football or sexual performance or the weight of feeling that no matter whatever you do, it'll never be enough to fulfill this thing that you were told you were only supposed to be.
Wow. Thank you for that. I'm over still taking
somewhere in there. I started thinking about like the erotic nature of like deep feeling, just, and that's so much of what the conditioning does, is like stops us from feeling that, and I appreciated that. That was very liberating.
That wasn't me. That was Uncle Jimmy. So it's funny. I did this interview earlier for ATT, and it was 5 like Black figures were celebrating connected to Pride. And my thesis is generally that like Pride Month is an extension of Black History Month, because y'all wouldn't have this month if it wasn't for us.
Okay.
And I celebrate that Uncle Jimmy, James Baldwin, like he doesn't write about, I said also he's not a gay writer, he's the writer. But he was the first person to write about intimacy between 2 men in a way that was like palpable and tangible and tantalizing. And what it reminds me of often is that like, for most people, what it means to be queer, gay, same gender loving, whatever, is simply reduced to sex, like the act of sex. I'm often, especially before this job, when it was much more of a question whether or not I was same gender loving than it is now a declaration that's made simply by association. I resented having to have conversations with people where they were expecting me to come out, which is something that I hate, disagree with, want to blow up, am actively attempting to blow up. But where people were asking me questions about how I love and the way that I love, because they were interested in how I was having sex. And so to go back to the question you asked, like at the center of, or the anchor in all of what I described, is the ability to love and be loved. And I say often that like, so seldom do people, when they ask about my sexual identity or when they're talking about my gender expression, typically they don't have that language. They could give 2 fucks about whether or not I'm loved.
Yeah.
That's so far away from any of the questions that they're ever asking. It's almost always about sex and this raw, pun, word intended, like fascination we have with not just sex, but gay sex in particular. It's why people spend so much time trying to out people or asking the question about who's free in the ways that we otherwise are vilified for. And I want us to get away from that.
I definitely agree with that. We are going to, I'm like trying to transition. I'm like, how do you transition?
You just
we're
do.
going to go right into our spotlight as well. And I think this helps, like this transition is something that this coexists. So Devin, take it away with our spotlight for this episode.
I was still sitting in that.
Good, right? I was like, first of all, also it's okay to let things marinate and let things, it's okay to be in that moment because you
sit in it.
So this week's Black Boy Joy Spotlight goes out to Hippie Potter. First of all, I just want to say I've had the pleasure of meeting, his name is Thaddeus, twice. The first time I met him was at Afro Punk. Got to dance, like we just had like a sporadic dance moment. It was really nice, and I just figured out how tall he is. So tall. He's a very creative, very talented individual. He's been featured in Target ads. So delightful to see his smile because it's so cute. His work is available on his website. So that is hippiepotter.bigcartel.com. And he sells his merchandise and art products there. And then you can also see his work on his Instagram, which is Hippie Potter. Even VH1 recently tweeted his artwork. So he's really like doing the work and starting to be a lot more visible. So super want to throw out props to him for that. Always love seeing Thaddeus anywhere. And I would look forward to seeing where the next year is going to take him.
Ooh, yes. And we are going to go into just our little rants and hot topics for today. We're just going to just talk about two of them. First of all, have you watched Legendary? Dave. Is there a reason why, or you just haven't watched it yet?
Because Black people are being killed, literally. I've written no less than a dozen statements about the lives of Black people who have been murdered since June 1st. So no.
I've watched it to get away from that, which is interesting because I feel like for the first, I would say 9 days, I was so absorbed in it. And what I noticed was happening was it was becoming difficult for me to do my job. And I provide a direct service to the people in DC, specifically a lot of Black people in DC. So in an effort to continue that, I had to take a step back. Yeah, no, it was really important for me to do that work. And honestly, there's been this really interesting progression from when I started working after school to this point. I was very conscious about working in nonprofit and very specific about working with Black LGBTQ people. And it took me quite a while to get here. But yeah, so in an effort to continue being able to do that work, it was important for me to start stepping into my own reality. While still being aware of what's happening around the world, I needed to step back into this space. I've created this space here to be something where I can get away. And I do the work in here. I used to be really against doing work in my safe space, but now my safe space is the only place I can actually do work.
Yeah,
I get that.
Yeah, that's the same with me. I got consumed, and it made me like a mentally and physically drained. Like consistently consuming the war on protesters, and even this damn COVID. It was just very exhausting for me. So I was like, I want to just indulge in something that I think is like something I will like enjoy, and I think that it gives to visibility in our climate right now. But
Definitely for this.
So y'all are saying that if this is the show that I'm going to spend a little bit of time that I have when I should be sleeping watching, that this is what I should watch? I
would watch the first episode and then see what you want to do after that.
You'll walk that back.
I'm not trying to tell you to dedicate time to it, but you know what?
I'm asking, right? Because somebody told me recently this came up with Low Fires Everywhere. I watched the first episode. I was done. Hooked.
Ooh.
Talked about it. Devoted time on social media to it. I'm just asking, is this the same kind of request, invitation?
I love that the conversation is happening. The conversation in the show, it's very aware of the platform it's got, right? It's very aware of who's watching now. And they make a point. Dominique Jackson specifically was like, the regular people, they might be impressed by this, but I'm from the ballroom.
I know what
so they make an effort to make sure the viewers know that this world exists outside of this show, and this show is only going to capture a small amount of it. So I think it's interesting to watch it for the sake of seeing how a lot of people who haven't had this platform, how they adjust to it, and then also seeing what the world looks like in a lens.
I respect that. And shout out to Dominique Jackson, who has been working with the capital W and Q for decades and doesn't get half the credit that she deserves.
I can tell she doesn't.
I know she's like, I'm getting this motherfucking credit, whether y'all think I don't deserve it or not.
And she should.
Well, the other thing too, right, to go back to the conversation we were having earlier, I would love to ask her if I had the opportunity, if she feels that our community has acknowledged her in the way in which we should. I don't know. I feel like I'm about to trip over some hot wires on this one. There are other people who care a whole lot more about what white people feel.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Dominique is one of those folks. And so I say that to say that in my mind, she's always shown up in community. She's always done her work. She will continue to do that. It is important for white folks to catch up in the way in which they are always attempting to, but I don't think that that's why she's motivated.
Devery, for the sake of time, do you want to go into our questions and just skip the next one? Because I really want to ask you about these things.
I was definitely down. I'm reading the room. I'm like, oh no, we gotta jump in. So my first question is, what are you seeing? Like, what do you see in our country right now from your lenses?
I feel like what I'm saying is a combination of the last scene in Spike Lee's School Days and the moment in Spike Lee's Malcolm X when he talks about the chickens coming home to roost. And I spent a lot of time talking to members of the media and well-meaning white people and Black folks for whom all of this feels very foreign about the reality that this shit ain't new. That while there are literal fires that have been set in the last few weeks, that the soul of our country has been burning for centuries, not just decades, right? We are still having anniversaries around the first ships docking here that possessed African bodies trapped in transatlantic enslavement. We still don't have conversations about the fact that white people who taught everyone riots and rebellion to get away from a system that they were born into that didn't allow them to have privileges that their lineage told them that they otherwise weren't deserving of, and how that resulted in Native people being introduced to the post office and parcelage as a way to steal land. We don't talk about the reality that we still, to this day, tell kids to be fair and have a sense of morality while the person that occupies the Oval Office tells people to drink bleach, while his family literally profits from the pain of people that he's supposed to serve and maybe even protect. And all of that in a society composed of people who are much more alike than they are different, right? To be clear, what we talk about and what is often demonized as our differences should otherwise be celebrated, but physiologically, with regard to our biology, our ways of making meaning, right? Even when you account for differences in topography and geography and time zones and language and countries of origin, like, we are much more alike than we are dissimilar. And in spite of all of that, we still all support and contribute to the systems that facilitate our oppression. And for those reasons, it should not be surprising to anyone that Black folks are still having to remind people that in order for all lives to matter, as people like to post on my timeline as if it's a novel construct, that Black lives first have to matter. Or that unless and until we address the fact that the police as an institution exists to control Black bodies and have been empowered because of the judicial system, which says that white people can weaponize the police to control Black bodies, while we can anticipate being killed, being tried for our own murder, and at best hope that the person is maybe arrested, means that at this point in time, especially while people are dealing with the economic implications of not being able to participate in capitalism, the political failures of the lies that we're usually able to tell people based on how the political system functions, the failures of a medical industrial complex that at a minimum usually suggests to white people that they're cared for even if they don't have money. All of those things being non-existent in this moment is forcing people to say, fuck it.
Yep.
in acknowledging that all of this stuff has always been true, as Black feminists have taught us some time ago, and that unless and until we work together, none of us are going to be free in the way that we often like to lie to ourselves or lull ourselves into thinking that we are.
You know, what's interesting about that is, and that's a point I've been trying to drive home, and the best way I know with the people that I grew up with, right? With the people who come from my background, which is the Eastern Shore of Maryland, education.
You don't say Maryland?
We don't. My mom said that when me and my sister moved to PG County in second grade, we came back home saying Merlin, and she was like, absolutely not. But like trying to reinforce the idea of like strength through community, and like that it is through the people that we will find liberation, because so many people are looking to figureheads and are looking to like celebrities, are looking for someone to swoop in and save them. I had to have this conversation with one of my close friends recently, and I was like, there will be no one person who will save us, and there will be no one person who will lead us out. We have to collectively do that for each other, and we have to collectively wake each other up. And I've been trying to get people to see the importance of community, but I think a lot of people are genuinely afraid. Number one, because they haven't imagined freedom in that way. And number two, because their livelihoods are at stake, and they were at stake before, right? And now it's like, I truly don't know what's going to happen. I don't think, because community isn't ingrained in them at such a grand level, they're afraid that if they fight back and lose everything they have, there will be no coming back from it.
I'm going to push you on that. And I was looking down because there are a couple of books by Octavia Butler over here that always think about when I encounter the fact that we have been pushed out of the ability to dream, right? This is, again, developmentally, children, young babies are using 50% of their brains, while as we develop and are older and become more settled in adulthood, we use less than 10% of it, right? We in particular, and I don't really care about white folks, I acknowledge the ways that their oppressive systems affect our lives, but I care about Black folks. So when I say we, I'm talking about Black folks. We are born feeling the importance of community. Mm-hmm. So much of what I think we are collectively struggling with, whether it is reflected in the public mourning of the families that have been victimized by state-sanctioned violence, or the effects of COVID and COVID-related complications and challenges, or the effects of capitalism and economic oppression, is the disruption in our ability to convene and be together and put our hands on each other and lay eyes on each other in the way that we're accustomed to doing, especially in moments of trauma. And on top of that, there have been very few of us in our community that have ever had anything that is worth sacrificing yourself or your family over. I'm talking about the kind of wealth that we dream about, that we've given to Jeff Bezos while we all have been quarantined at home, those of us lucky enough to have homes, that we celebrate Oprah, Diddy, and a few, Tyler Perry and others for having. And if anything else, I need people to sit, and we talked about like the importance of sitting in feelings, like we should all sit in the reality that for most people, it took a global pandemic to remind them that like your paycheck, even if you got a credential or a degree from a nice university, like that shit is all temporary and temporal and controlled by somebody else.
Yeah.
That's what literally has people willing to risk their lives to go protest in a global pandemic.
So what do you think is causing the hesitation?
The hesitation is, I think, threefold. One, we exist in a world where Black feminists refer to the matrix of domination. This shit is not by happenstance, right? Like there have been decisions made by people that have been exceptionally privileged and well-resourced, starting with having guns, to be able to design systems. Black feminists refer to science systems and symbols that allow the matrix of domination to work. The matrix of domination is white supremacy, anti-Blackness, homophobia, all of the things that structure and separate us so that we can be easily sorted and controlled.
Yeah.
That shit is very real. Again, it is one thing to talk about adopting a language of liberation. It is a whole nother to live in it. Mm-hmm. That withstanding, the longer that we deal with the weight of white supremacy and anti-Blackness and oppression, the harder it is for us to dream. It's one of the reasons why I stay connected to babies. And I call, all students our babies in that regard. But I think I say that to say that it's less about us not knowing, because we know the things that we know. That's how Black people have been able to be resilient heretofore.
Mm-hmm.
It's the lack of time and space and ability to dream. It's often the lack of resources that are required to shift. It is often the lack of faith that is required to say, fuck all of this. I will flip this table. I will burn it down. I will walk away. I will do the thing that I need to do in order to be free. That's what usually gets in the way. And there are so many things that come with capitalism and the trappings therein, and the ways that like white supremacy mutates and often develops, that makes us feel better about having to sacrifice parts of ourselves to be able to enjoy those things. It's a cold ass system.
It is. Okay. All right.
And we know better. That's actually my point. Like, I want us to acknowledge what it is. One of the fundamental components of critical race theory is racial realism, right? Acknowledging things for what they are, and then moving and developing strategy and operating based on that.